Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Jason Flame, and this is the Master Motivation Podcast. We're back again today. We're doing a take two with our guest, and let me introduce him to you. This is Roger Lacombe, who is the owner of Premier Martial Arts Westlake. He has owned and operated his school since 1976. Mr. Lacombe is a 9th degree black belt in Tang Soo Do, a 7th degree black belt in the Chuck Norris System, and a black belt in Krav Maga, and a brown belt in Doce Pares Stick Fighting. He has studied with notable instructors such as Benny the Jet, Joe Louis, Superfoot Bill Wallace, and Chuck Norris. He has promoted hundreds of people to black belt, as well as a Hall of Fame member in the Martial Arts History Museum. So, Mr. Lacombe, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jason. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you. And now you can hear me, which is a good thing. We tried this on Monday, and technology doesn't always cooperate with us. So anyway, here we are. I want to remind everybody that's watching this live, if you have questions throughout this interview and throughout our discussion today, please just drop a comment and we'll be happy to bring that up on the screen, whether it's a comment, a memory, or a question that you want to hear either one of us answer. We'll be happy to put that up there. So, Mr. Lacombe, if we could just start, history, background, kind of growing up, those things from the very beginning, and then we'll work our way through from there.
Okay, very good. So when I first started martial arts, well, first off, there wasn't many karate schools back in the early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was going to a grammar school, there was one of my friends that had taken some karate, not sure exactly where. And every time I would see him, he'd have some kind of injury of some sort. He'd hurt his arm, he broke his arm. And I'm thinking, wow, martial arts, I don't know if I want to do really martial arts. It seems like it's a little bit too hard. And so back in the day, the only way you could really see martial arts was you'd go to the grocery store and you'd pick up an old Karate Illustrated, magazine. You'd open it up and you'd look at these people doing these kind of moves out there and go, God, that looks pretty interesting. I really, think I'd like that. And so then along comes Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee was, of course, doing the Green Hornet, which is a little before my time, but he was doing a TV show called Longstreet, and Longstreet was about a blind detective, being and he was going through this alley, and this guy jumps down from this rafters, and it's Bruce Lee, and he takes out about 3 or 4 of these guys. I'm going, man, I got to learn how to do that. That is, something that's really, really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So it just happens that they had opened up a studio right up the street from where I was living, and I had this girlfriend of mine that I liked, and what she would do is she went into this studio, and they had asked her to distribute some flyers and stuff for their studio,
Mm-hmm.
and typically a month later she'd come up to me and she'd say, hey, they're not paying me for the flyers I did, so would you go up there and and ask them if they could pay me for the flyers. So I go up there, and I've been, of course, looking through the windows, for the last maybe month or so. And I'm watching who was one of my instructors, a guy named Dave Beerley. And he had all of this flashy stuff. He had the red headband on. He had the uniform on. He had all the spar, we didn't have sparring equipment back in those days, but he had all these different things that he's sparring. I'm going, I got to learn how to do that. So I walked into the studio one day, and this guy named Jay Phillips comes up to me and goes, hey, boy, how come you're not taking karate? I go, well, I'd like to. Well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go down there and ask your dad for $25 for the uniform and $50 for the tuition, and we're going to get you started. And so I walked down there to my dad, and I said, Dad, I want to do karate. He says, well, I don't know. That's a lot of money. He says, but what I'll do is if you okay with cleaning up and helping me mowing the lawn, that kind of stuff, we'll let you do it. And I said, okay, I'll go ahead and I'll do it. So my first lesson, I went up there, I'm in blue jeans and a t-shirt, took my first class, and I don't think I've ever stopped ever since then. It was back in 1972.
Wow.
Long time ago.
So now you grew up in the San Fernando Valley.
Yes, sir.
All right. Born and raised there?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I went to Taft High School. And matter of fact, when my first instructor and really a great martial artist was Bob Burbage. And of course, you knew Bobby, didn't you?
Sir. Yes, I did.
Yeah, I mean, Bobby's the man. And so I remember going to, I used to belong to this church. And so this friend of mine from the church invited these karate guys to come up, and they were Shotokan people. And they did this demonstration in karate. And I go, man, I got to learn how to do that. And that's when I first started doing, classes over at Woodland Hills Karate, which Bob Burbage. And, it's funny, back in those days, I was really fortunate to grow up in a really interesting time. Some people in my generation call it the golden era of martial arts, because it was right after Chuck Norris had stopped competing. And it was right that one area where he was still around. He was teaching people. He had this organization. Bob Burbage was there. And it was just a interesting time. And I remember as a young blue belt, watching Benny Urquidez come up, and he would spar with Bob Burbage. And there was another guy by the name of John Atkinson. Did you ever know John Atkinson?
I didn't meet him, but I've heard so many stories.
So he was a black belt of Bob Osman, who later on, you came to my studio, and he's a kind of a legendary guy as well. And so he used to come up, and he was just known for just speed, fast. John Atkinson was just super, super fast. And that's how I met my good friend Ken Firestone, who was a black belt from them. And at the same time, actually, Ron Ponnell, when I first met Ron Ponnell, he was a yellow belt at Bob Osman's school, and lasted a short time, and then he went over to Dennis Ichikawa and all of that. But it was really, just watching those people compete was amazing.
Oh yeah. Well, before I dive into a little bit more of that, martial arts history, that karate Tang Soo Do era, I would love to know a little bit more about you as a child. What kinds of hobbies did you have before martial arts? What kind did you play sports? Were you into things at school? What was your hobby?
Yeah. So when I was growing up, there wasn't, all the computer games and all that stuff that you have out now. So we basically would go out in the street, and I was real big in sports. So I would do baseball, I would do basketball, I do football, anything that was, with a ball and running around. I was a very good athlete. I could jump. One of my specialties was jumping. I could jump up in the air. So even at my small, 5'7", 5'8", I could jump up and hit the rim on a basketball. So I was really into sports, but I realized at a certain time that I wasn't quite big enough maybe to go into that next level, football or being a basketball player. So when martial arts came around, it was actually the perfect fit for me. And so I was able to use all of my athleticism doing martial arts, kicking, punching, jumping, all that kind of stuff. And then at the same time, I had a half brother that came to live with us when I was about 14 years old. And he was 9 years older than me, for my dad's first marriage. And he had some issues. He had polio when he was very young, and had some certain kind of brain type of damage. He was called borderline retarded is what he was. But he was a really great guy. And so I used to, work with him, help with him. And I think that probably helped me as a person. So when I went into the martial arts, not only did I love doing the martial arts, but I loved giving it back. And so early on, when I first started taking classes, my dad had given me the money to take classes. A few months after that, down the road, he wasn't going to give me the money, and I didn't have the money. And so basically I had to come to the instructor and say, hey, well, first off, I would come to the afternoon classes and miss the guy who was the finance guy in the afternoon. So finally one day I walked in, and he grabbed me, he goes, "Hey, you owe us some money." And I go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the money." And he said, "Well, we really like you a lot. So how about this? How about if you come in, help out some classes, vacuum the mat and do the mirrors. We'll let you take classes." I said, "Great." And that's how I started.
How many times do we hear this story with these, with lifelong martial artists like ourselves, who we got to a point where we couldn't afford martial arts on our own, so we ended up trading. And I can't help but think that everybody that's had, Mark Cox, Dennis Ichikawa, all the instructors that I came up with, we talk about this all the time. I was one of those students that where, my parents could pay for it, but then we ended up kind of trading a lot of work for it. But my point is that those of us that worked to trade for lessons had such a deep appreciation for what we learned and what martial arts had to offer that it's literally transformed our entire life. And it's something that we still continue to do to this day. I mean, do you find that in your own school where you've had students that have come to you that maybe couldn't afford it, that you extended that same offer to?
Oh, sure. Always, you always you try to do that and help out. I was just thinking about how things have changed, to some degree, obviously through the years. And when I was training, I'm sure as you were as well, you had these idols, that you looked
Mm,
up to. And I remember looking up to these people and going, I just want to be just like them.
mhm.
And, they used to be able to do all of these different things. And what's interesting is back in the late 70s or 80s when I had my studio, and I would go out and do these demonstrations. I used to go to the Oaks Mall and all these different places, and I would do all of these demonstrations. I bring my students out there, and back then it was such a mystique. Not
Mhm.
everyone did martial arts like they do today, and so when you used to do these fancy jumping kicks and one steps and all that kind of stuff, people would go, "Oh my gosh, that's
Breaking boards.
unbelievable! We got to learn how to do it." Yeah, exactly. Nowadays, if you can't do a triple backflip and a gymnastics move, everyone likes and goes, "Oh, what's that?"
Right.
It's
It's
certainly a different era.
it is for sure. Now, real quick, you started martial arts when you were how old?
I actually started kind of late. I started when I was about 16 years old.
Okay, started at 16. Okay.
Yeah.
And so now, did you play those sports that you were talking about, football, baseball, all the different running with a ball sports, right? Did you play those in high school?
So I would say yes, yes. I actually played. Well, I started off playing football, and because I was the fastest guy on the team, and I right before the season started, I wound up getting sick. I like mononucleosis or something like that, and so it
Mhm.
took me out of football. So that was kind of the end of that. And then after that, I decided I was going to do that. Started playing basketball. Played basketball for several years, and then I stopped, and then I just got into martial arts. And then,
Mhm.
once I started doing martial arts, I really didn't do much other than just that. I mean,
Mhm.
I just did it pretty much full time, and I was working at the studio, sort of, paying my way to lessons. And so basically, I was there all the time,
Right, right, right.
three,
Yeah,
four days a
that's
week.
kind of how my life went. I was very interested in football and wrestling in high school, and I started martial arts when I was 10, so got a
Mm.
little earlier start. But I remember distinctly, and I still regret it to this day. And I talk with my son about this, about regret, about things that you could do now while you're young. And I said, you gotta get out there and play football, and gotta wrestle, try to play sports in high school, because you look back and you'll go, man, I wish I would have done that. Um, and so he got to do that. And I know your son also, you have a son that's played football. I've seen some of your posts. So that's kind of cool that they get to live that out. It's just one of my regrets that I didn't wrestle. And I still see this wrestling coach. He's still a wrestling coach, Manny Valdez for Thousand Oaks High School. I still see him every now and again. I walk up and I introduce myself, and he doesn't always remember me, but I remember distinctly telling him one day, "Hey, listen, I can't do wrestling anymore because I got this karate tournament, and I'm going to that." And speaking of, I remember when I was probably, gosh,
Hey, I was going to bring this up. Do you remember how we met?
yes. Well, let's see if you remember the first time.
I do remember the first time. It was a tournament at my studio.
Yes. And Pat Johnson
Did
was
you?
the head judge, and he about kicked me out in the next week.
I don't think I did. I think he did.
That was the first time. So I was maybe about 14 years old, young, dumb, full of extra confidence. And I went. But here's the thing: that the history with that too is we went to your school to do this tournament, and I remember my mom going, "I know this guy. I know that." My mom might be watching, by the way. I know
Oh,
him,
good.
and
Hi.
she's
Hi,
like,
Mom.
she went to Taft. I believe she went to Taft. She knew you from the Valley anyway. Both my parents went to school out there. My dad probably went to every high school that was in the Valley. Kind of bounced around a little bit. I guess that's where I got that a little bit. But I do remember that, and I was going to bring it up. And I'm just going to say in front of the entire world and you and Pat Johnson, man, I wish someone would have grabbed me as a teenager. Well, they did, actually. I had Brian Nan, Steve Clark, Mark Cox, and say, dude, check your attitude. But I do
Hey,
remember that.
listen. You've come a long way. I'm so proud of you, really, Jason. I mean, from that first day that we met to where you are today. I mean, you should be very proud of yourself and your family. You've got a beautiful family, and it's great to see what you're doing right now too.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. It is a lot of good fun memories with tournaments back in those days too. Let's talk about, so when you first started training, you brought up a lot of names, and here's where you and Tom Bloom and Dennis Ichikawa all were kind of in this circle, although you all had your schools separate back in the day. I started with Mr. Ichikawa in 1985. He was teaching at the rec center. You already had your school. I'm not sure if it was the one on the corner of Lakeview. Is that the one?
The first school was in Westlake Village, the first neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
over by Bennett Park.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a beautiful park. And I started there in around I actually came out around 1970. Let's see, I made my black belt in 76. I actually, it's funny, my original instructor, Bob Burbage, Brett Gold, Dave Beerley, they had a partnership. And so they were doing well. And I was a green belt. And they decided that they wanted to expand. So they moved up to this area called Westlake Village. And back then, there was nothing up there. I mean, it was just very, very sparse. And so they split the kind of the partnership. And so they left Bob Burbage and Brett Gold, the good-looking blonde hair, down in Woodland Hills. And then I came up with the money man, the guy, the financer, Dave Beerley, the smart Jewish guy, and me. And so we went up to Westlake Village. So we started doing that school, and within about maybe a year or less, you could figure out what happened. The smart business guy and the money, Westlake Village, stayed up. The one down in Woodland Hills failed because they didn't have any business sense. But so I started there back in the middle 70s. Dave Beerley was my instructor. I bought half the school when I was a red belt. And then when I made my black belt, he decided to get married, moved to Colorado. I bought the rest of school. And so then I studied there. And I was there for about 5 years. And the roof came in from flooding. So I closed that school, moved to Lake Lindero. And back then, the Thousand Oaks Boulevard didn't even go all the way through. It stopped right there at Lakeview Canyon. And then eventually opened up to Morrison Ranch and all the way down to Canaan Road. So I started with that school. I was there for a number of years, and then moved to a bigger location in the same shopping center. And then that's the one you went to, probably back in, I don't know, early 80s.
I think I want to say it was 87, 88. So it's maybe late 80s.
Right, something like that. And so I was there for about 26 years, actually. Yeah. And then I moved back to my original location. My wife, who's a chiropractor, her and I decided we were going to kind of branch our businesses out together. So we opened up this, martial arts health center, where she had a portion of it for health center. I had the other portion of it for my martial arts school. And we were there for, a number of years until we realized that nobody knew where we were.
Right.
It's a hidden location. Unless you lived in that neighborhood, nobody knew where it was. Right. And so we moved over here now by Stonefire Grill, and it's great. I mean, it's just it's a great experience.
Yeah, that's a nice location. I think that this is probably my mom. Mom, correct me if this is you, but she said that she went to Canoga Park High.
So Canoga High School was the oldest school in the Valley. It is still probably the oldest school in the Valley. And that's legendary, that school. I remember going there when I was on the basketball team, and it was kind of like going to the old, Boston Garden before they, changed it up a little bit.
Right. So now kind of clear this up. So when you opened your school, you trained with Bob Burbage, but that was not your first. Mr. Beerley was your first instructor, or Bob Burbage?
No, Bob Burbage was the head instructor. They had Bob Burbage, Dave Beerley, and Brett Gold. Brett Gold was the afternoon instructor, and he used to like going to the beach. So when I was a green belt, he said, "Hey, do you mind if you teach the classes in the afternoon so I can go to the beach?" I said, "Sure." So I actually started teaching when I was about a green belt, and then when I moved on to the school out in Westlake, Dave Beerley was the main instructor. He's the one I bought the school from. And he was affiliated with Chuck Norris. Had a group. Originally, he was with the Tang Soo Do Congress with Wong Ki, who was the head better. And so somewhere back in the 60s, before my time, they split up, and Chuck Norris had his system, Wong Ki had his system. Well, Dave Beerley somehow got associated with that Wong Ki organization. So I actually, in 76, made my black belt with the Wong Key system, which was called the Tang Soo Do Congress. And I'm pretty sure Master Ichikawa probably has a certificate from that organization as well. I think he was back in that time frame. Maybe, I can't remember. But anyway, so 2 years later, I was getting ready to go for my second degree, and the only people that were associated with that organization at the time was a guy down in Torrance named Victor Guerrero. And so when I went down there with one of my red belts, John Everson, who was actually my first black belt, but technically not really, because he was actually a black belt or a red belt with Dave Beerley before I bought the school. So him and I went down there, we trained, and the attitudes down there for that organization was horrible. It was just very like we went down there and they're literally trying to kill us. We had to kind of defend ourselves. So I remember leaving there with him and I'm going, God, this is not really what I envisioned, what I wanted to do. So my instructor, Bob Burge, had opened up a school with Brett Gold down in the Valley, and Pat Johnson used to be down there, and he used to teach Steve McQueen privates. So I knew him kind of through that. So I went down there and told him my story. And this was back in the day when he says, you know what? He goes, you ought to give Chuck Norris a call. Okay, fine. You give me your phone number. So I called up Chuck Norris, and we kind of hit it off right off the bat. We just, we have a kind of a similar personality. And so we talked for about 45 minutes, and he said, you know what? I want you and Pat Johnson and I are going to meet you down at Sherman Oaks studio. We're going to take a look at you, and we're going to kind of go from there. So I went down there all by myself. They're sitting there on a bench watching me, train. And they said, yeah, we kind of like what you're doing. So we're going to give you a first degree. Brett Gold's got a test coming up in 1 month, and we're going to go for your second degree in a month later. So that was back in the day when you can kind of go from one to the next. And so that's how I kind of started with the Chuck Norris system. And then, that was a beautiful, beautiful time. I mean, I feel so really fortunate in my life, very blessed that I've been able to have the opportunity to, I used to go down to Chuck Norris's house and train with him. That was a really great experience because I'm in my early 20s. He's probably in his middle 30s, early 30s. We would train for 3 hours. We'd be dead, and he'd continue going for another 2 more hours after that. I mean, he was just an amazing, amazing man. Met Jean-Claude Van Damme one day. I went down there, and I see this guy stretching, his legs between 2 chairs, and he goes, "Yeah, this is Jean-Claude Van Damme," and whatever. It was just, great times, and so. It's just a beautiful time. And, I've experienced so many different wonderful things in my life. The thing about martial arts is I use it every single day of my life, from the discipline, the focus, the just being able to, not get too worked up about, like, if somebody, maybe I'm driving and somebody cuts me off, or I go, whatever, I'm not going to worry about anything like that.
Right.
Very calm, and just kind of let things kind of go, and in the discipline and the focus that it gives you.
Yeah. I love to remind my students that all the time, because you hear teachers at school or parents say, don't use your karate outside the studio. And I understand what they're saying. They're saying, don't use your physical skills, your punching and your kicking. But I tell my students every day, I want you to use your karate every day, everywhere, all the time, because you can always have focus, discipline, show respect, in everything that you do. So I think that is an important statement to make.
I remember Chuck Norris telling me something many, many years ago. And he said, the thing about taking martial arts is what it really ultimately comes down to is making you a better person.
Yep. Absolutely. Now, hey, Brett Gold, was it Brett Gold that had a school in Malibu for a short time?
Yes. Bob Burbage and Brett Gold both had a studio in that area off and on. And so, yes. And then all of them, they actually came to work for me through the years. Bobby was there every Thursday night, and he would do his fight night. And, Bob was a great guy. And but he was an interesting guy also as well. He was very hard, disciplined, Aryan type of guy, and basically you followed what he had to do, and if you're not going to give me 100%, then leave. Get out the door. It used to be back in the day, where you'd have all these people sitting on the ground that go, who's going to make a black belt? no, maybe one of you going to make a black belt. Nobody's going to be hard, to train hard enough and to be able to be that black belt. And it's kind of times have changed a little bit. Back when I was first training, it was like you felt like you had to, in order for you to be a black belt, you had to be able to, take out 10 different people. Be strong enough, tough enough to be able to make that black belt. And then I was fortunate to be the first martial arts American team to go to China back in 1992 with Ken Herrera, who's going to be on your show next week. He's a beautiful man, and a guy named Steve Smith. And Steve Smith was, for just giving an example, his black belt number for Chuck Norris is number 32. What's Dennis Ichikawa is a little bit higher than that,
60,
right? Close to
67. As a matter of fact, when you were talking about the numbers, I was remembering he was 67, and he talked specifically about that instance when Chuck Norris decided to break ties with Korea, and it was all about like, look, if you want to test today, you go here. If you want to go with Korea, go over here. And like everybody's like, well, I'll test today. And I forget who. Right. I think Bill Parent. I think he told me tested that same day with him.
So Bill Parent, I was a blue belt at the time, and he had a studio in Granada Hills. And I remember going over there to watch, I think it was one of my teachers, maybe Brett Gold, even Dave Beerley might have been testing for their black belt, might have black belt or second degree, something like that. And Chuck Norris was on the panel, and all of a sudden the Osmond brothers walked in. So the test stopped. He introduces the Osmond brothers to everybody. I'm going, oh wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, back then, again, there's so much intertwined relationships, back in those days because there were so few schools. But then, everybody kind of branched out. I mean, you have some descendants of either Chuck Norris, Pat Johnson, Dennis Ichikawa, yourself, Tom Bloom, Joey Escobar, all these people still have these schools out there that were all, under one roof at one time. Now, did you ever train at Sherman Oaks Karate?
I didn't.
You did not.
By the time I was starting to teach or to train, I think possibly Ron was running the school at that time. I think he might have been running the school at Sherman Oaks at that time. And that was sort of past that, Chuck Norris era that they did. But what was I was thinking of something, but lost my train of thought for a moment.
That's all right. Now, were you and Mr. Ichikawa or you and Tom Bloom ever on the mat at the same time?
No. Well, Dennis when Chuck Norris sold the school, Dennis branched off and he opened up that school at Capri Plaza. Do you remember Capri Plaza?
Yep. Well, it's a little before my time, but I know that it was there.
So he had a studio there, and I had my studio in Westlake. And so I remember going down to his school with my students, and we would do a competition. Then after that, he moved to the Thousand Oaks Community Center, I think. He was there.
He continued with his Tarzana school. He actually moved it on the corner of Ventura and Shirley. And then he started a new program at Thousand Oaks Community Center. Yeah.
Right.
That's where I started.
So then I had my school. And when I first had my studio back in 76, there was one other studio in the whole area. And so it was up in Thousand Oaks on Jan's Road. They actually changed that shopping center a little bit. There used to be a movie theater up there. And so there was a karate school up there. There was a taekwondo school. And I remember going there and observing the taekwondo school. And this was old style taekwondo. So the teacher, first, all the students were grouped together, and the teacher used to walk around with a stick. And if they got out of line, he'd whack them with that stick. And I'm watching this going, oh my God, that looks like brutal. Yeah. I don't want to do that. And so then about a week later, I went back up there and there was a note on the door. Studio closed. We moved to Korea.
Wow.
So then for a long time, I was the only studio in the whole area. And then I think Tom, and then I want to say Dennis came out first, and then Tom came out after Dennis. And then it was kind of the three of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Mr. Ichikawa opened in 86 because he built up enough students from the rec center. And I think that Tom was right around that same time, or 87. But again, it's always been interesting that we have, in Tang Soo Do, as we know, is not as well known as you hear about a Taekwondo school on every corner all over the place. Back then,
Well,
like
I know what
Tang
I was
Soo,
going to
what is
say.
Tang Soo Do?
You know what I was going to say was interesting is Tang Soo Do. There's actually two versions of Tang Soo Do, in my opinion. There's the traditional Tang Soo Do. So when I branched off with the Wong Ki group, all right, when I had that, when I first made my black belt, I remember when I tested, the traditional Tang Soo Do is actually not a black belt. It's a dark blue belt.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember when I was presented with my dark blue belt, I'm looking at this going, wait a minute, I was a blue belt 3 years ago. What about a black belt? But that's the traditional Tang Soo Do. And so when Chuck Norris sort of branched out, he was, a very popular martial artist, and he used to train with a number of different masters of different arts. And so he trained boxing, he was a brown belt in judo. And so he kind of made his Tang Soo Do kind of different. And some people actually call it now American Tang Soo Do. So it's not really that traditional style of Tang Soo Do. It's more of that Chuck Norris. And I think Dennis Ichikawa, all these people, Tom Bloom, we all kind of branched out into that, what you might call American Tang Soo Do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It was one of the things that I know Mr. Ichikawa talked a lot about, how Chuck Norris added so much more boxing to Tang Soo Do because he was getting beat in the tournaments, by all these guys that can punch. So he started pulling people in to train with to learn how to be a better puncher. And that, from there, that's where it went. Hey, let me throw this question up here because I think we can answer this now. Was there a karate studio across the street from Canoga High at some point?
Yes. Tall guy, Mark Lockwood. I think it was Mark Lockwood had a studio right across. Do you remember that name at all?
I don't remember that name.
I think he was he might have been a Ron Pournell black belt. And I think he made it. And I think he made a Chuck Norris black belt. And so I think he had a studio right across the street from Canoga High School, if I remember correctly. And he had it for a number of years.
Yeah. So again, so much history there. Ron Pournell was on the show, and Ron Pournell, from what I understand, started in one style, but ended up getting his Tang Soo Do black belt with Mr. Ichikawa, and then he was Tom Bloom's instructor, where Tom Bloom earned his black belt. So
so he started with Bob Osman, and so Bob Osman had the studio right across the street from Dennis Ichikawa's school in Capri, and so his instructor was John Atkinson, and then of course Ken Firestone came from there. And that was, that style. If I hadn't taken Tang Soo Do, I would say that that style that they taught there, it was called Ishinru, is a really good style. Very good martial arts. Bob Osman had this school for years. I want to say 20, 30 years. And of the 20, 30 years, I think he only had 25 black belts. Wow. And so it was really hard to make a black belt. They have this form called Seiyuchin. And Seiyuchin is where you make right about green belt level. You get into like a horse stance. And basically the instructor and the students come around and basically kick your butt. And most people kind of fall out at that. Once you get into that, that part of it, they go, I'm done. I'm quit. The ones that can stick with it after that, are like, solid as you can possibly be.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Well, now you went from, teaching the Korean American Tang Soo Do system. We're involved with the National Tang Soo Do Congress for a long time, but now you've moved to being a part of the Premier organization, and so I want to talk about that. What made you join the Premier organization, and are you still teaching a Tang Soo Do base?
So, what happened was somewhere back in 8-10 years ago. The Chuck Norris system, and it's changed now since then, didn't have any kind of a system of marketing. And so basically, if you were not like when I first started doing martial arts and teaching and had my studio, I did it because I loved it. I loved it, and I wanted to teach people and make people feel good. you didn't have to have a business background. You didn't have to have a marketing background back in those days. I was the only school within 20 miles, and people liked it. Good word. People would come in and train. Well, fast forward now, you need to have a lot more skills now. You've got to know how to market, how to advertise, you've got to do all this kind of stuff. And so there was a guy by the name of Aaron Hensley. Aaron Hensley was a Chuck Norris black belt, but he had met this guy by the name of Barry Vanover. And Barry Vanover created this system called Premier Martial Arts. And it was kind of a hybrid martial arts that basically focused on kickboxing and Krav Maga. And so, but it also had a business part of it. And so through Aaron, we met, Barry, and it's actually pretty funny, actually, because I had met Barry years earlier with Ken Firestone. There used to be an organization called United Professionals, UP. I don't know if they still have it anymore. And so Greg Silva was the owner of that. And Ken Firestone invited me out to Hawaii to meet these guys. It was Barry Vanover, Roland Osborne, who's really doing something great now, and Greg Silva. So we went out there, and the first thing they said was, okay, we want you and Kenny to teach a class. So we wound up and taught a class. And at the end of the class, we thought it was a great class. And they look at us and go, yeah, that's old school, man. I mean, that doesn't work anymore. You got to get these kids up here. You got to get them a clap. You got to get them around the mat. You got to get it. You got to stand up, sit down. I mean, it was just all this kind of, high energy things. I'm going, wait a minute. That's not how you do martial arts, And so, but, fast forward later, you find out that it's all great, all the little things that you do to kind of motivate people. And we do this personal development thing now where we, give them worksheets to do. All that's great. And so we joined the Premier Martial Arts System. And for me, it was pretty interesting because I had to sort of, if you're going to do something, you have to pretty much commit to it. You can't do it halfway. So when I went in there, I said, my wife and I, said, look, if we're going to do this, we got to do it all the way. So we pretty much started teaching that system, doing all of the different things that they, want you to do in the system to get it going. And I actually really like it a lot. When I would say when I tested for my Krav Maga black belt, that was the hardest test, and I'm sure you could attest to it because you've done it yourself. It was the hardest test I had ever taken. I mean, that test started at 9 in the morning and it went till 5 in the afternoon. And of course, I was the oldest guy, there. So, I mean, you have all these guys 20, 30 years old. I'm like, I don't know, at the time I was probably early 60s maybe. And so maybe late 50s. And so it was a grueling test. But at the end of that test, you realize, man, it was the greatest thing I probably had ever done. And, it's funny how I've trained with several different people with the Krav Maga. And I would say that one of the things that the people I've trained with, they all had karate backgrounds before they learned the Krav. And I find that that's a really good way to go, as opposed to, years past, if you learn Krav Maga, you go to a special school, you do Krav Maga, you've never done any martial arts before, and then they send you off and you open up a school of Krav Maga. But I think it's way better when the people that have done it have learned some martial arts before that.
Well, I think it's definitely a different experience because I've been through this process of having trained martial artists learn Krav Maga, and then having students that have never had any martial arts training get involved with Krav Maga. And you can just see there's kind of a difference. I mean, they're learning, their basic kicking and basic combatives and basic striking from the ground up, whereas a martial artist, a seasoned martial artist, already has the skills of the punching. The challenge with making the transition from a traditional martial arts to Krav Maga is that we're so, and myself, I was so stuck in, the rigid movement of traditional martial arts, and Krav Maga is a much more flowing system, and it has to be quick. What I do love about Krav Maga is that you can take someone that's never done any martial arts and teach them the mindset, the self-defense mindset. And I mean, you can get them hitting hard within 5 minutes. You can get them defending themselves within the first class. Might not look as clean and pretty as the traditional martial arts, but it's going to be effective. And I just had Danny Hazan, who is our main instructor from Israel, on, and his take on Krav Maga. Even though I've been through this system now for several years, coming from Israel and how they train in Krav Maga and why they train in Krav Maga, that might, going from a self-defense mindset to a lifestyle of life preservation, instead of self-defense, right?
Did you ever see that show, The Human Weapon?
I did.
It was on for a while, and it was about two guys. One guy was, I think, maybe a football player, I think, and the other guy was a martial artist. And they toured all around the world, and they studied every martial arts from every country that they went to. And so they did the one on Israel with the Krav Maga, and I remember watching that, and I'm thinking to myself, we live, well, America is a little different now than it used to be, but we live in a very safe, community for the most part. Krav Maga in Israel, I mean, you got to watch out for these suicide bombers coming down. So their mindset is completely different. And as you were saying about Krav Maga, it's all really about mindset. Everything is about mindset. With the techniques aren't much different than martial arts. You got your palm strikes, you got your elbows, you got your knees, but it's how they present it with the mindset and trying to, push you as hard as you can go and make you feel, that you have to, put you in a pressure situation of some sort. But I have to ask you a question, and for self-defense now, if you had to defend yourself, wouldn't you go right to Krav Maga almost?
Yeah. When I started learning Krav Maga, I really changed what we were teaching in our school. Believe it or not, and a lot of school owners give me a little grief on this, but we still teach traditional forms. I still teach all of the Tang Soo Do forms in our juniors program. Our adult program is Krav Maga specific. So we, unless we have a parent that's training with their child in Tang Soo Do, our teens and adults go directly to Krav Maga. But the self-defense that we teach to our junior program is more or less the same Krav Maga techniques, because
just
I couldn't
kind of watered down a little bit.
I just couldn't go back. Once I learned a more effective way of doing self-defense, I couldn't continue doing what we were doing before, because there was a lot of make-believe. There was a lot of demonstration self-defense versus what was, in my opinion, more realistic and effective. And trust me, I love performance martial arts as well. I mean, we have a Raptor Extreme Karate program, which is similar to the old XMA. And we love that for some of our older youth and
yeah,
teenagers.
I saw that. My daughter, Sophia, she lives in Tennessee with my wife. We have a house out there now. And so she does competitions all over the country now. And she does what they call extreme martial arts. So she does kamas and bow staff. She was in gymnastics, so she does flips and flows and all kinds of different things. And it's just amazing. I was watching some of the Raptor thing, and I'm going, wow, that's exactly what she does, and it's really cool, what they do now, hard to imagine, doing that, but
well, it's hard to keep up too, because the kids are so the kids are on YouTube, the kids are watching videos all the time, right? And and they don't see traditional martial arts in the videos. They don't see traditional martial arts in the Avengers. They see performance-based martial arts. But then you go and you watch some of these, movies about, whether it's, let's just say, more violent movies where you're seeing actual self-defense in action. And in essence, what you're seeing is Krav Maga for the most part. And I just like that we have been able to, and I think this is one of the things for you as a premier school can understand and relate to, is that we don't just teach that one base art anymore. I mean, we have Tang Soo Do, we have Krav Maga, we have Raptor, we have, wrestling, grappling, jujitsu, boxing, like it's all kind of blended. And you said earlier that Chuck Norris told you that martial arts was making you a better person. And I think when we really started focusing on that in our schools, that's when we started embracing the other styles more versus sticking with the old just because that's the way it's always been done, right? We've adapted quite a bit.
I was going to say, going back to the Krav Maga for a second, we teach the self-defense moves. It used to be where, you'd have somebody kind of get you in a wrist grab or something, and you'd have 5 or 6 or 10 different things that you could do to do that. Well, that's great. But in reality, you don't have time to think about all those 25 different things. You have to be able to react immediately. And so one of the things that I enjoy about the way we do Ken Brayman is our head Krav guy. He makes everything very simple. You don't have to, you could do almost the same move on a lot of different techniques. You don't have to think about 25 different ways to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be very simple. Self-defense should be very simple.
Absolutely. Definitely agree.
But going back to what you were asking earlier, so I teach a little bit of everything. I have some people that I'm still in the Chuck Norris organization, and I'm getting ready to be promoted this year to 7th degree. So I teach primarily the Premier system, which is the kickboxing, the Krav Maga. But then again, you have my, 40, 50 years of martial arts as well. So I'm teaching the, footwork, combinations. We do some forms. I still teach the Chuck Norris system. It's funny, has through the years kind of adapted and changed. So their system now is very similar to the Premier system that I teach now. They do Krav Maga now. They do jiu-jitsu. They do weapons now. I mean, that's another thing that back in the old days in Tang Soo Do, we never had weapons. We never really did any kind of weapon training. You might have if your instructor, taught it. But now when we went into the Premier system, now we're learning how to do the Eskrima stick. We're doing the bow staff. We're doing the nunchucks, which of course was always a great thing from way back when. But we adapted that in, which was never part of our traditional system. Do you remember doing weapons when you were first starting?
You know what? The only weapon that we did coming up the ranks, we used to do an annual martial arts convention with all of Mr. Chikawa's schools, and he invited Tadashi Yamashita to come and teach, and he did the bow. And so we learned a form that we adopted as Bo Hyung. And that was the only weapon we really got to do. I mean, some of the kids would pick up a pair of chucks and kind of learn on their own, but there wasn't a lot of specific teaching on that. Now, talking about weapons,
that was probably the traditional bow, the heavy wood bow, probably.
Oh yeah.
Nowadays, you have the bows that are so light, people are throwing them up in the air, spinning. It's all about tricks and.
Goes back to watching the event. It goes back to watching the Avengers. It goes back to watching superheroes and watching what the Avengers doing. But you have some experience in Doce Pares. Is it Anthony Kleeman that was teaching at your school?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. He's an amazing guy. It's scary when a guy like Anthony Kleeman, who's probably 6'3", 220 pounds, and a black belt from Benny Urquidez. I mean, it's scary when a guy like that knows martial arts.
He's a big boy. I have him coming up on the show later this year as well. So.
Oh, you do? That's great. That's great. He's a great guy. He's a great guy. Master Smith, you should probably get Steve Smith to come out there and do a show. He's was one of Chuck Norris's first black belts. He actually trained with Joe Louis. Funny story. I got to tell you this funny story. I don't know if people like funny stories, but Joey Escobar, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Joey Escobar tells me the story, and it's the funniest story I think I've ever heard. So before Chuck Norris and Bob Wall bought the studio in Sherman Oaks, it used to be a Joe Louis studio. And so Joe Louis had the school, and it really was not doing that great financially. So Chuck Norris and Bob Wall came in and bought him out. So here comes Joey Escobar, young kid. He's probably, 8, 9, 10 years old at the time. And his dad comes in, and his dad really wanted him to train with Joe Louis. So he comes into the studio, and Bob Wall's sitting behind the desk. And Joey's dad goes, "Are you Joe Louis?" Bob goes, "Yes, I am." "Well, good. I'm going to sign him up."
That's great. Yeah, I've heard some real good stories about Bob Wall. I mean, Bob Wall is the man responsible for Mr. Chikawa starting martial arts, and without that, connection happening, I would have never done martial arts.
Bob Wall is a guy you either love or you hate. And the one thing that I've learned through my years is that if you worked for him, it wasn't a good experience. But hey, I had a great time with Bob Wall. He was always very helpful to me. I was used to go down to his house in Encino, and he had this big house on the south side of the boulevard. And I would train with him, Bill Wallace, and a guy named Roger, Bob's friend. And so we would go down there, and the first a month or so, I'd go down there. Bill Wallace is calling you every name in the book. He's trying to really make sure that you're, okay to do this. And he's, calling you every name in the book. And about a month later, he'd say, look, and goes, hey, you know what? You're a pretty good guy. I like you a lot. And so, so I used to go down there quite a bit. And I was there with Bob Wall on 9/11 when 9/11 happened. We were watching it on TV, and he, immediately went to the phone and created this thing called American in Defense. So we used to work for American Airlines, and we would travel to different hubs and teach the flight attendants martial arts. I mean, he was a good guy, and he was always helpful with me. He was always, if I ever needed a question answered or something, he had this what they call the manual, and every manual almost that you see in martial arts schools today was derived from Bob Wall's original manual. He had it down to a science. This is how you do a demonstration. This is all the things you need to do. This is how you teach a class. I mean, he created this thing back in the early 70s, and everything you see today is pretty much derived from that type of thing.
Wow.
And so, he was always kind to me, always good to me. Not so with other people, and but that's Bob Wall.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're getting towards the end of the interview today, and want to thank everybody for watching. I know Dana Abbott was watching. My mom was watching. We had Jim Chandler watching.
Oh, my good buddy, Jim Chandler.
If you guys have any questions, now's the time, because we're just about ready to wrap it up. So please comment if you have any questions, and please do me a favor, share the video so more people can check us out. We've got had some great story time, kind of a lot of going back in history, talking about the good old days, right? It's always fun to kind of bring up that history. So thanks for being on the show. Thanks for sharing with me. Thanks for, just educating the audience on some of the background.
Thank you for doing what you're doing. I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing, and you've got some great people that you're, interviewing, and there's nothing like the great martial arts.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. It's great to have met so many amazing people in the martial arts industry. This podcast started with a lot of martial artists in mind that I really just wanted to pick their brain, just wanted to know a little bit more about the backstories and talking about some of that history. But then it's branched out now, authors and comedians and actors, and so we've got a definite diverse group on here. I'm very happy that it's continuing to go strong, and as long as people are enjoying watching, and as long as people are willing to come on the show, I'm happy to do it. So thank you again for being on the show today.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it. It was great. Hope
All right,
touched
guys.
on everything.
Hey, well, listen, thank you everybody for watching. Please subscribe on YouTube, Master Motivation Podcast, share the video, like and comment, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks again.
Bye, everybody.